Good morning, welcome to the JVS show. I'm Jonathan Vernon-Smith. It's Wednesday, it's 9 o'clock, and on today's Big Phone In, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism? Presidential hopeful Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. Speaking to Good Morning Britain on ITV, he described yesterday's Brussels attacks as outrageous and a disgrace that was allowed to happen. He also said there was a massive Muslim problem in Britain. The so-called Islamic State group said it carried out the attacks that killed 34 people and wounded more than 200. Well, I want to know from you, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism? Presidential hopeful Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. Speaking on Good Morning Britain on ITV, he described yesterday's Brussels attacks as outrageous and a disgrace that it was allowed to happen. He also said there was a massive Muslim problem in Britain. The so-called Islamic State group said it carried out the attacks that killed 34 people and wounded more than 200 at Brussels airport and on the city's underground railway. Police are hunting a man filmed by security cameras at the airport, and there have now been calls for tighter security. Philip Baum is an expert in the field, and he says there are techniques that work.
Behavioural analysis is all about identifying somebody that has negative intent, and it doesn't matter whether it is a passenger, a crew member, or an airport inside. And I've long advocated that this should be the primary method of screening at airports in the UK and worldwide. And there has been so much resistance over the years to the deployment of behavioural analysis because people feel that we're going to be racially profiling people rather than making intelligent decisions based on common sense.
A bomb, chemicals and an IS flag have been found at a home in Brussels. The attacks came just 3 days after the capture in Brussels of a leading member of IS who'd been wanted since the mass killings in Paris in November. 2 British citizens were among the more than 250 people wounded in the attacks. A computer programmer from Nottingham, David Dixon, is missing. His partner Charlotte Sutcliffe is in the city searching for him. His sister Marie is travelling to Brussels to help with the search.
She's been on social media, friends are helping to put out the message from family that he's still missing. She has been involved with the British consulate. When she was at the hospital, the police, she had an interview with the police, so they've got all the details now, and it's just waiting, which is heartbreaking and very worrying.
Well, the latest act of terror has, of course, shocked the world. The emphasis now seems to be shifting to how we protect ourselves from another similar attack. And interestingly, Piers Morgan, writing in the Daily Mail today, is suggesting that perhaps for once we should take Mr. Trump's comments seriously. Well, I want to know from you today, do you think it's fair to do as Donald Trump has said, to tell Muslims that they can do more to prevent terrorism? Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. He says that they can do more. Well, if you are a Muslim, I'm very interested to know what you make of his latest comments. Do you think it's fair to say to your community you can do more to prevent terrorism? 03459 455 555. Miqdad Versi is the Assistant Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. Good morning to you, Miqdad.
Good morning.
Morning. What do you make of Donald Trump's latest comments then? He says that you as a Muslim can do more to prevent terrorism. Is that fair?
I think we have to be very careful here about going down this route. We have to look at the facts on the ground and what Muslim communities are already doing. Hundreds of people have reported incidents already, according to the National Police Chiefs Council. Muslims have driven out extremists from mosques. And as a whole, Muslim communities, I think around 95% of Muslims would report anything that they saw, even if it was within their own community, to the police.
Why not the other 5%?
I mean, this is what happens with all polls, right? You always have some people who misinterpret question or say something else. Those numbers are in line, if not higher than the broader British population. So, look, we have to recognize that Muslim communities as a whole are reporting very well, are engaged in the process, and of course more can be done. And, the Muslim Council of Britain has encouraged and will continue to encourage people of all faiths and none to report to the police if they see something that's breaking the law.
What do you think of those bombers who killed all the people yesterday?
The same as what you think. I mean, it's ridiculous what they've done. It's abhorrent. These actions represent the worst of humanity. And, we have to be very careful that, all Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims will have the exact same view as everyone else in the society. These are fringe elements who don't represent anyone at all.
Do you think that they will go to paradise?
I have no thing. I'm not some sort of Jewish who'll look at that kind of thing. But of course, that kind of action reflects the worst of humanity, and no way that I would think that someone who would commit acts like that would have any chance of being in paradise. Right.
Okay. Because that's what they think, isn't it? They think that by carrying out those actions, they think that they are going to paradise.
They think a lot of things. I mean, their views do not represent anybody. They are the worst of humanity in the way that they target civilians and kill people in this way. I mean, I don't think there's any difference of opinion between the vast majority of people in the world on this issue.
OK, stay where you are, McNadd. Let me bring Godfrey Bloom in, who's a libertarian, who I understand agrees with Donald Trump on this issue. Good morning to you, Godfrey.
Good morning to you. Good morning.
Why do you think Muslims can do more, then?
Well, I think they can do more, and they can be seen to do more. But I think also, if we just rewind a little bit, I'm old and I was a very young soldier many years ago, and we had the terrorism in Northern Ireland. And we had ghettos, we had no-go areas, which we crushed with Operation Motorman, which is probably before your time, Jonathan, and most of your listeners. But what we need to do is to make absolutely sure that the state sends out a message that this will not be tolerated by the state, and that will free up Muslims to feel, I think, more confident in stepping forward more proactively to stamp out this thing. But while these terrorists are allowed to parade on the streets with their flags under police protection, and we've seen them demonstrating, while this is allowed to happen, you're going to find that Muslims are probably a little bit circumspect in coming forward.
What, because they feel as if there's going to be some kind of retribution for them?
Absolutely. And of course, this was what was happening in Northern Ireland. It cut off intelligence. When the people are more frightened of the terrorists and the bad guys than they are of the state, your intelligence clams up. And while we have, and we know we have, ghettos where the police don't go, we have no-go areas in this country. Until we stop that, until we stop them intimidating the prison service, where very high numbers of Muslim prisoners, this needs all to be dealt with if one expects, as well as Muslims, to come forward in this crusade against these people. And I agree there with your speaker from the Muslim Council. It is a small minority, and I think most people accept it's a small minority. However, that isn't good enough. I'd like to see a lot more done. I'd like to see law-abiding, good Muslims come on the streets in their tens and thousands to demonstrate against this. But to be brutally frank with you, Jonathan, the silence is pretty deafening from the Muslim community.
You believe... Godfrey, I'm going to ask you just if you could move slightly, because your mobile phone signal is a little bit iffy, and I want us to be able to hear everything you say in crystal clear quality, if you wouldn't mind. But while you're moving or attaching a dustbin lid to your head or whatever you have to do to make your mobile work properly, let me just ask McDad to respond to that point. The silence is deafening. Godfrey believes that the Muslim communities in not only this country but around Europe are not speaking out loudly enough against this terrible terrorism.
I think that's just not true. I think that's factually incorrect. You have Muslim communities across the country having condemned this attack without equivocation. Even after the attacks in Paris, Muslim Council of Britain issued a full-page advert in the Daily Telegraph to condemn the attack and make it very clear what the position of Muslims in this country is. I mean, that cost thousands and thousands of pounds. It was raised just for the purpose of putting an advert in the newspaper. Look, we have to recognize this is murder on the street. I mean, who has it, the people who think that Muslims support this? I mean, it's very upsetting to see that there is even an inkling of doubt that someone who has lived in this country the whole of their lives is suddenly being asked or thought of that they don't condemn murder of innocent civilians. We need to get over this. This is not the time. What we have to do is find a way that we need to tackle the real problem. And this idea that there are no-go areas in the UK. I mean, when Donald Trump said that the first time, the commissioner of the police said this is just wrong nonsense. And some, it is very rare that you have the commissioner of the police responding to a politician's statement from abroad. But he found it that abhorrent, that statement, that he had to respond. Even the Prime Minister talked about it. And from what I understand from Piers Morgan earlier today, Donald Trump himself doesn't believe it anymore in the UK, or he chose not to repeat it when it comes to no-go areas in the UK. So we need to really base our discussion on facts, base our discussion on fairness, and in the same way that I wouldn't expect you or anybody else to have to try and defend the far-right extremists who end up, throwing things at mosques and attacking Muslim women on public transport, because that is ridiculous, and I wouldn't expect you to say anything else. I wouldn't expect the opposite either. But in spite of that, Muslim Council from Britain has condemned this attack, as it has done for a range of different attacks through the past. And, there have been terrorist attacks against Muslims. Muslims are the biggest victims of terror attacks across the globe. I mean, in Turkey, just this week, around 50 people have been killed in terror attacks. And we don't hear much about that. So we have to recognize this is a global threat, one that affects us all, and we need to work together to try and solve this problem, rather than trying to create division in society by trying to say, oh, why aren't you condemning? What are you doing? I mean, this is not the right approach to try and sort the problem out.
Do you think that there is any truth in the other point that Godfrey made, that some Muslims are afraid of retribution from the appalling people, and I mean, I hate them, and I would hope that you hate them as well, these Muslims that stand on street corners shouting and chanting and trying to encourage people to dislike this country as much as they do, and yet they're standing on the streets of this country. It makes me absolutely furious. But what Godfrey is saying, that while they are allowed to do this, it intimidates the Muslim community. Any truth in that?
I think there may be some truth in that. I mean, we need to understand this properly to see it. You recognise that obviously they're on street corners and not at mosques, and not within Muslim communities, because they've been thrown out, right? So we have to understand this dynamic that's happening, and the fact that these are fringe elements within communities. But we have to also be careful that we don't, suddenly fall into the trap of trying to let the terrorists affect our freedom of speech and the core values of our community. Katie Hopkins and other such commentators have made vile comments about Muslims and about refugees and others, which if you like, intimidate many people and result in intimidation and encourage far-right extremists to continue their acts of extremism.
And Godfrey, isn't that part of the problem with your argument, that the government cannot ban people from shouting about their hatred for this country on the street corner, because they're then limiting their freedom of speech, and that is so important in all kinds of walks of life in this country?
Well, certainly as a libertarian, I would support that situation. But of course, let me just pick up on a point. The police commissioners said there were no-go areas. There weren't any no-go areas. It was denied at senior level, but it was very soon endorsed at policeman and operational level, wasn't it? If you remember, they said, "Oh yes, there is." The chief constable might not admit it, but that is the fact of the matter. And of course, what you have conspiracy laws. The laws are already in place. If somebody is inciting violence, if somebody is supporting jihadism on the street corners, all the law is there ready and available to have those people arrested, and more than arrested, I would ship them off to where they come from. I'm fed up, and we're all fed up with these wretched people getting away with blue murder all the time. Let's pack them all off from wherever they came from.
Yeah, but the problem is you can't use the let's pack them all off to where they came from, because some of them come from here.
Well, in that case, they need to be incarcerated and interned until they behave themselves.
What's interesting, there's a text, and let me read this to both of you. Janet texts to say, Jonathan, so-called Muslim hate preachers who are allowed to rant on our streets. Where are the moderate Muslims? They should be out in their thousands shouting, "Not in our name." What's quite interesting, I don't know if you both watched the programme The Jihadis Next Door. I did. It was very eye-opening, very depressing. But what was so interesting was the only people who confronted the hate preachers on the street corners were other Muslims. The only people who said, "Shut up, go away, we don't want to hear this rubbish, you're talking nonsense." The only people that did that were Muslims. And surely that demonstrates exactly what you're saying, Miqdad, that Muslims are, when they see it, when they see this kind of hatred, unnecessary hatred of our country, of our society, of our culture, they will stand up and confront it.
That's exactly right, and that's what happens in reality. These views of the fact that people think that Muslims aren't speaking up, that's not because they aren't. It's because very often, a sensationalist media headline is not going to talk about Muslims condemn terror. I mean, it just doesn't happen. As a whole, they're very willing, as a whole, you see a lot more on the fact that there is a lot of terror happening, and you don't see the same reporting of the continuous, ongoing condemnation from Muslim communities, the strong statements of how this is not in our name, and how in reality Muslim communities are working very closely with police and other security force engagements, as well as the rest of the community, to try and tackle the threat from a very small fringe element within communities who actually aren't taking their actions within mosques or within communities, but they're getting radicalized online, within the fringes of society, in back alley, back rooms, not as part of Muslim institutions. And the reason that's the case is because Muslim institutions do not tolerate this kind of extremism and hatred for the West.
One final quick question to you, Godfrey, if I may. Mm-hmm. At a time like this, don't we need to all be sticking together, both Muslims and non-Muslims? Isn't the division exactly what the likes of IS want to achieve? And actually, Donald Trump's comments in effect, blaming the Muslim community for the terrorism that we are seeing, isn't that just falling and playing absolutely into IS's hands?
Well, I don't believe in all this hand-wringing and bursting into tears. I'm an ex-soldier. I'm a man of action. I want all the bad guys who stand on the street corners, I want them rounded up and I want them interned, and I want that to happen today. And that is in everybody's interest. Yes, it's in the entire community's interest, including the Muslims, because if this continues, ordinary peace-loving Muslims, good members of society, are going to suffer really badly. It'll be their mosques that are burned, their shops that are burned, so we need to deal with
Who will do that?
Well, there will be a right-wing backlash on the streets, as they're bound to be, if the state, the government and the police aren't seen to be actioning. People will take the law into their own hands, and that's in nobody's interest at all. So this is more of a call, perhaps, not to necessarily just the Muslim community. This is a call to the state, to Theresa May, the Home Secretary. If you don't get a grip of this, it's going to get worse, and other vigilante groups will get a grip of it.
Very interesting. Thank you, both of you. Miqdad Versi, who's the Assistant Secretary-General of the Muslim Council of Britain, and Godfrey Bloom is a libertarian who agrees with Donald Trump's comments. Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. Do you think there's any truth in what he says? Or is this just typical Trumpism? Based not on fact at all, but in an attempt to fearmonger and to scare and to divide. 03459 455 555. Do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism?
Call Jonathan Vernon-Smith now. 03459 455 555.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
The Beatles, Lonnie Donegan, The Who, David Bowie, The Rolling Stones. They've all played local venues over the last 60 years, and many of you went to the gigs. And on Good Friday, we're telling your stories.
Another real distinct memory in my mind is just quite simply how many people there were, and the fact that I've just never literally seen so much denim in my life.
The People's History of Pop charts your musical memories and stories.
In 1963 was a cinema called the Odeon. It's where the Beatles played, just over there. On that stage.
From shows at venues no longer there, to collecting some strange memorabilia.
People were walking out with monitors and speakers on their shoulders. People just taking things because they knew it was going to be bulldozed down.
So join us to chart the people's history of pop in beds, hearts and bucks.
Behind us in the queue was a local group called the Zombies.
Good Friday from 6 here on BBC Three Counties Radio.
On FM, AM, online and digital radio.
This is Jonathan Vernon-Smith.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Yes, and this morning, on the big phone-in, I'm asking, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism? The presidential hopeful Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. Speaking on Good Morning Britain on ITV today, he described yesterday's Brussels attacks as outrageous and a disgrace that it was allowed to happen. He also said there was a massive Muslim problem in Britain. The so-called Islamic State group said it carried out the attacks that killed 34 people and wounded more than 200. Well, I'm asking you this morning for your response to Mr. Trump's comments. Do you think it's fair to tell Muslims that in some way they're a little bit to blame for the terrorism and that they can do more? Or do you think it's absolutely appalling if you are Muslim yourself? Maybe you want to respond to his comments. You don't think there's anything you could do to prevent terrorism. If you overheard some complete fruit and nutcase talking about how he was going to go and bomb somewhere, you would certainly call the police. You're not going to keep quiet about it, as Mr. Trump seems to be suggesting would happen. 03459 455 555. Mark and Dunstable text to say, I told you before. My nightmare would be Trump getting into the White House with his stupid comments on the race of people. This could cause more Muslims to become involved in terror. Many Muslims in this country are just as disgusted with what IS is doing around the world. Chris in Bedford, good morning to you, Chris.
Morning, Jonathan.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Yeah, this strikes me that it does come down to a bit of a reputation thing, a trust thing. You know, perhaps if there are mosques who are known probably to the police and Scotland Yard as being the first to come forward when they suspect something's wrong, then it gives a red alert to the 1 out of the 5 mosques in that area.
But how do you know they're not? How do you know they're not? The British security services have apparently foiled 7 attempts in the last 12 months. How do you know that is not largely from security tip-offs that have been given to them from within the Muslim community?
I hope it is, but I hope that any reputation takes some time to build, and as that continues, they can get a better idea. We're in a difficult position. It's fairly new in the Western world that we have attacks from IS, obviously, and from groups like that, and a reputation we built, and it sounds like the mosques, the Muslim people groups are doing their best to do that, to gain trust from who it's important to gain trust from. Perhaps there is more to do, but there will become a point when there's no more that can be done, and the only ones who are causing problems are the ones that basically that they're aware of. They can go, look, we don't have a trust with this particular group, with the group of Muslims in this area of the town, or from this mosque. Therefore, they're the prime suspects, just as it would be with any other community group that didn't have a relationship, didn't have a reputation.
Godfrey Bloom was suggesting that what he would like to see is hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Muslims in this country all marching through the streets of London, shouting and chanting, "Not in my name." Would you like to see a similar outpouring, or is it unnecessary and unfair to put that kind of pressure on the Muslim community?
I'm not sure that a public event like that would achieve much, but certainly for groups to be proactive, it's not their fault that they are linked in the same way that they're put in the same bag as underplay it, but troublemakers. But they need to be seen to be doing something rather than turning the other cheek, and just ignoring it. Oh, it's nothing to do with me, I'll just shut up. Well, no, hang on. If it's nothing to do with you, speak up.
Chris, thank you very much. 03459 455 555. Is it fair, though, to suggest that there is turning the other cheek, ignoring concerning behaviour that is going on within the Muslim community, not only in this country but in the rest of Europe as well. What do you think? 03459 455 555. Particularly like to hear from you this morning if you are Muslim. How do you feel when you turn on the radio this morning and you hear that Donald Trump has made this kind of comment? This is a man who stands a chance of being the next president of the United States of America. And he, in effect, is blaming the Muslim community for the terrorist attacks and saying that the Muslim community of Europe could do more. Do you think he's right? 03459 455 555. I want to hear from you.
Travel news for beds, cards and bugs.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
The M25 anti-clockwise, it remains closed between junction 21A for St Albans and junction 20 for Kings Langley because of a crack discovered in a bridge near junction 20 at about 1 o'clock this morning. Traffic from the M1 still able to go anti-clockwise through to junction 20, but it goes down to one lane there. The queues back on the M25 to junction 24 for Potters Bar, taking over an hour to get through there onto the diversion, which is down the A405, then onto the M1 northbound at junction 6, or back onto the A41, then the M25 rejoining again. As a result, the A41 queues from Watford to the Hunton Bridge roundabout. Delays also back through London Coney, St Albans, Radlett, Bricketwood and Watford. The M1 southbound queues between junction 6 for the M25 and 5 at Watford. And the A40 at West Wickham, that's closed in both directions because of an accident. Tom Watts, BBC Three Counties Radio.
Thank you, Tom. More travel news in half an hour's time. It's the big phone-in on BBC Three Counties Radio. This morning I'm asking, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism? Presidential hopeful Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. Speaking on Good Morning Britain on ITV, he described yesterday's Brussels attacks as outrageous and a disgrace that were allowed to happen. He also said there's a massive Muslim problem in Britain. Well, I want to know what you make of his comments. Is it fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism? Or do you think, actually, for the vast majority of Muslims, 99.9% of Muslims in this country and around the rest of Europe, they have nothing to do with terrorism, they are not informed of terrorism, and if they could report it, they would? 03459 455 555. If you have a view, I'd like to hear from you.
Across beds, hearts and bugs.
This is BBC Three Counties Radio.
With the headlines, I'm Simon Oxley. The two suicide bombers who attacked Brussels airport have been identified by the Belgian media as brothers who were known to police. A hunt is continuing for a third man who was with them. Here, David Cameron has chaired a meeting of the government's emergency committee. The M25 remains closed in Hertfordshire after a crack was found in a viaduct underneath the anti-clockwise carriageway. The anti-clockwise stretch is closed between junction 21A and junction 20. Diversions are in place. Councillors in Milton Keynes have approved controversial plans to build a concrete plant and waste recycling centre near Willen Lake and Willen Hospice. Committee Chair Councillor Andrew Geary opposed the scheme but says his colleagues decided they could affect the plans more by voting in favour and imposing conditions rather than risk the developer going to an appeal. And an influential government committee has told HS2 its communication with residents has not been good enough. The proposed high-speed rail line would go through Buckinghamshire. HS2 Chief Executive Simon Kirby says they recognise that more needs to be done. The weather, a cloudy day, some sunny spells, a maximum temperature 11 degrees Celsius. Those are the headlines. The next full bulletin is at 10.
Across beds, hearts and bucks.
This is Jonathan Vernon-Smith.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Yes, good morning. Coming up at 11 today, I'll be dealing with your consumer problems. Also, a little later on this morning, the future of one of the UK's best-known high street names, BHS, will be decided today when its creditors vote on whether to back a rescue deal. Without an agreement, the company may go into administration, putting more than 10,000 jobs and 167 shops at risk. Well, I want to know from you, do you ever shop in BHS? There are BHSs all over beds, hearts and bucks in our high streets, but do you ever go in them? Do you ever buy stuff? Pick up the phone. I'd like to hear from you after 10 today on that. First, though, on today's Big Phone-In, I've been asking if you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism. Presidential hopeful Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. Speaking to Good Morning Britain on ITV, he described yesterday's Brussels attacks as outrageous and a disgrace that were allowed to happen. This is what he said. What's going on there and what's going on in many other locations like Paris and others is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace that we allow it to happen. He then goes on to say, he's come out with all kinds of things today. He has said that the Muslim Council of Britain representatives, they disputed Trump's claim, labelling it just not true. But he says that as far as he's concerned, Muslims are turning the other cheek. They are not reporting concerning things within their own community. Any truth in that? Or do you think he is yet again just trying to whip up a sense of hatred towards the Muslim world? And that is really, really unhelpful. At a time like now, it's never been less helpful. Do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism?
Call Jonathan Vernon-Smith now. 03459 455 555.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
They're protecting each other, but they're really doing very bad damage. They have to open up to society and report the bad ones. That was exactly what he said. Alan in Milton Keynes. Good morning to you, Alan.
Morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. What do you make of Donald Trump's comments then? Do you think it's fair to say to Muslims you can do more to prevent terrorism?
Well, I think it is true to say that, and I think probably most moderate Muslims would agree with that. Because let's be honest, I think we're being fed a lot of propaganda by people where the real reason behind it is because they want us to not express our point of view. And I think what Donald Trump is doing is allowing non-Muslims to say how they see it, not how Muslims would like us to see it. I think there's a huge difference. I mean, I don't think it's possible to deny that the recent terrorist in Belgium who went back to his family and friends, you can't simply say that just the odd person here and there is aware of these terrorists. It just obviously is not true. I mean, I should imagine that there are hundreds throughout the networks that know what is being done by other family members and everything else, and maybe it's not true.
But do you genuinely believe then that, for example, the mother or the brother or the sister or the best friend of one of these complete and utter nutcases, if they knew that they were planning on bombing and killing innocent people, killing children, for example, you're honestly suggesting that they would just keep quiet about it?
Well, you would think that would be impossible, wouldn't you?
Yes.
But the trouble is, for 4 months, he's been hiding out with these people.
No, but how do you know he's been hiding out with people that are likely to report him? How do you know that he's not hanging around with other converts to this bizarre and sadistic form of Islam? How do you know he's not just hanging out with them?
Well, I mean, we don't entirely know, do we? Because what's not happening is the Muslim community, although they tell us that it's not in their name, we are still getting these terrorists just crawling out of the woodwork. And let's just remember something here, in all honesty. Whatever these terrorists are, whatever's gone in their brain, whatever's turned their minds into their state of evil, they are and were just ordinary good Muslims, weren't they?
I don't know that they were necessarily good Muslims.
Well, they were good Muslims because when they come back from Syria and they come back to society, you know, presumably they're going to become good Muslims again. I don't know. I mean, it isn't, you know, for too long, Jonathan, the people, non-Muslims, have been denied this expression of how they see Muslims in this country. We know how Muslims see themselves in our society, but we in this country, by and large, do not necessarily see it the same way. And I think until Muslims see us in the same light as they would like us to see them, we're going to actually just see the beginning, I think, of some massive backlash, because as it happens in all societies, in all generations, sooner or later, when the right buttons are pushed there is an uprising. And I'm talking about revolutions in France.
Well, and I was going to just ask you to respond to, and this was a point that Godfrey Bloom made a little earlier. He seemed to be suggesting that if there is an attack in this country, and sadly it's probably more of a case of when rather than if, because we know how much, I mean, can you imagine how much IS would love to carry out a terrorist attack on our soil? It would be a fantastic prize for them, wouldn't it, to claim British lives? Yeah. So it probably, sadly, is a case of when it happens rather than if it happens. But he was suggesting that when it happens, there will be a backlash from the right wing in this country, because unless the government actually cracks down on some of the behaviour, for example, the hate preachers who stand on street corners and say, oh, Britain is evil and Britain's going to hell and everyone British is awful and Britain should be bombed to within an inch of its life, and we'd like the flag of Islam flying over Buckingham Palace and Downing Street, and all the kinds of disgusting things that these preachers preach on street corners. Unless we see the government stopping this, people will kind of act out in a vigilante way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's going to happen. And I think we should be asking the Muslims the same kind of questions as they're asking us. You know, they're talking about Islamophobia, about what we are doing to Muslims. Why don't we turn this around and say what Muslims are doing to us?
But how do you...
They're urging us in our streets, Jonathan, and I respect the fact that most Muslims would not be doing this. But the point is, you know, these hate preachers, for example, in Finchley, were they arrested? Were they all rounded up? And I remember seeing hundreds, literally hundreds of ordinary, we would regard them as ordinary Muslims, sitting all down in the street and listening to this preacher, and the police were walking on and looking. This was only a few years ago, hundreds in Finchley on the main road, blocking the traffic. It was there, very plain to see. Now, the point is, we can't be presented with those kinds of images, John, and not be affected by it, because our culture and Islamic culture are probably that far apart that there's probably nothing no further apart than those two cultures. Because democracy...
But then surely that's a fundamental reason for why we as a community in this country and around Europe, we need to all stick together. We need to be as one. We can't let IS divide us. We cannot let Donald Trump divide us. We need to all stick together.
Donald Trump is not dividing us, Jonathan. Donald Trump is not dividing us. What's dividing us is the fact that people are not saying what they feel, and when they do say like they feel, as in the case of of Trump, you know, he's considered to be an extremist himself and Islamophobic. And until this attitude about speaking freely what you think is actually resolved, the extreme left will have a field day, and this is going to happen, I feel.
But I don't know that there necessarily is a I mean, we're always told that you can't say what you think, you can't voice your concerns. You have just called up to a BBC radio programme, and you are being allowed to say exactly what you want. I'm obviously keeping a close eye on what you're saying, or a close ear on what you say, because what I will not allow you to do is in any way to incite hatred. But as long as you're not inciting hatred, you and anybody else listening to this programme, you are entitled to speak freely and to state your opinion. And I don't know that that's ever changed. You've always been allowed to do that.
I would say that this is a fairly recent development in the UK, Jonathan. I think it wasn't that long ago when a guy hung up a flag of England, and he was ordered to take it down. And he was.
I don't recall that incident. What are you talking about? What
I'm getting to, Jonathan, is that there was a point when that was frowned upon, because if you waved a Union Jack or the English flag, you were somehow being a racist. You know, and now, and of course, the expression of how we feel about Muslims or anybody else is always portrayed as being Islamophobic, isn't it? Always. And as you say, at some point in time, moderate Muslims and non-Muslims must either come together and iron out these fears and these perceptions of each other, or we must face what will almost certainly happen, because it's happened throughout thousands of years of history in all countries, in all generations. There will be aspects and people that will rise up and do what they think they consider to be a kind of retaliation against people that are caught in this. And this surely, Jonathan, must lie primarily with Muslims.
Okay.
It must be, because we don't know, Jonathan, do we? We're not of the same culture. I have people I've known who are wonderful people, very kind, and they're Muslims. They're fantastic people. But, you know, Jonathan, something's got to happen to stop the extreme side of both sides of this divide, isn't it?
But just because somebody hijacks your religion and takes your religion to an extreme that you would never personally take it to, why should that mean that you are in some way held responsible for that?
Well, we're not saying they're responsible for it, Jonathan. But
I mean, people have taken the Bible before, haven't they, and used that to justify all kinds of awful things. But we don't say that every single Christian is responsible.
And are we saying that every single Muslim is responsible?
Well, I think Donald Trump kind of is, because he's saying...
He's simply saying that Muslims should do more.
He's saying Muslims are protecting each other.
Jonathan, if we reverse this scenario entirely head to toe, and non-Muslims now, or in the past few years, were going out to Muslims in the streets and in their mosques and trying to murder them, would not the Muslims be saying to us, what's happening to this Islam? You know, already there's a rise in Islamophobic attitudes and crime, and we're getting this every time some Muslim talks on the television about Islamophobic people. But why don't we reverse this? Are we murdering Muslims in their mosques? Are we trying to blow up Muslims in their schools or anywhere else? Are we trying to, you know, are we guilty of molesting and assaulting Muslim children? No, we're not. But the point is, if it was that way around, what would the Muslims be thinking of non-Muslims?
Well, the problem is with your argument that the problem with your argument is that very often our foreign policy as a country is used as the counter argument to what you've just said. Now, I don't personally agree, and it appalls me when people constantly say, oh, well, this country is to blame for all of the backlash because we went into Iraq and we bombed Iraq. And I don't tolerate that, because I do not believe the fundamental reason for bombing Iraq, there were many mistakes made with Iraq, but the fundamental reason was not, oh, let's go to a Muslim country and kill a whole load of Muslims. That was not the motivation for it. But unfortunately, in making the mistake of invading Iraq and toppling Saddam Hussein, what we have as a country done is we have given those who want to distort the truth, we've given them something to beat us with. They can counter your argument with, well, yeah, but the UK has killed lots of Muslims in Iraq, innocent Muslims, it's killed children, it's invaded another country, this is just now a little bit of retribution for that.
Actually, Jonathan, I would actually disagree with you, because I personally think that if Bush and Blair had not gone into Iraq, had not gone into, you know, in other places and tried to say to them, listen, you must accept our form of democracy, and therefore, you know, because that's what your people want, and this is the way we're going to do it. If we had not gone into Iraq at all, then I don't believe ISIS or this crisis would exist. And I actually firmly believe that.
But that's the point that I was making. That is what is used to beat us with. The whole creation of ISIS, it's all because of initially our foreign policy.
I think it is. I think it is, Jonathan. I really do. And I'm not saying. I mean, let's be honest. The people like Saddam Hussein, who kind of tortured his own people, and they were disappearing by the hundreds of thousands. We know this was going on. We know that the Muslim leaders, the Islamic leaders of these countries, how they are all absolutely, totally corrupt. But the point is, ordinary Muslims in the street were actually suppressed, and they believe...
Yeah. Look, you don't need to tell me. I can't stand it when people say, oh, well, the UK is absolutely to blame because the UK has killed loads of Muslims. It drives me absolutely mad when people use that argument. Thank you for your call, Alan. I'm going to move on because I want to speak to Amin in Watford. Good morning to you, Amin.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. My thoughts, listening to your idea earlier about Donald Trump saying that Muslims should do more. I mean, I personally am a local community worker, and I'm also originally from Pakistan. We had some functions in the House of Lords condemning even Paris attacks in the past. We've been to Trafalgar Square, where Muslims gather around to protest against these Paris attacks. And even in our communities, we have gatherings where we condemn these attacks. Even in the mosques, we pray. Our priests also, after the prayer, they do pray against what's happened in the Paris attacks. So basically, you can't say the Muslims are not doing enough. I mean, Donald Trump, what does he want the Muslims to do? I mean, he's not making it clear. I mean, for what I've just mentioned.
He thinks, and he has suggested that you and other Muslims are protecting one another. And if you find out that you've got a wrong 'un in your community, you're keeping it quiet. You're not reporting them to the police.
Can I tell you, I mean, the police in Hertfordshire are very good. I mean, they've got intelligence, and we also have a system. I teach our community to keep your eye on your kids, whatever they're doing on the computer. I mean, it's important that this message should go to everyone. I'll give you example of Jihadi John. He wasn't a Muslim. He converted to a Muslim. What he's done, I mean, he wasn't born as a Muslim, so he's been either brainwashed. That was totally wrong. I mean, he lost his life. I mean, I'm feeling sorry for his mother, what he went through. I mean, this is a wrong attitude. He chose his line. I mean, that's the way he went.
So, Amin, can I ask you, as a community leader, have you had the cause to have to report someone or raise concerns to Hertfordshire Police about someone within your community?
Not raise. I haven't had any concern, but we make people aware. I've got kids as well. There's certain. One day you might just wake up and you might find your kids are not, in your house, and some, you probably find out they're in Syria. I mean, it's very alarming and very worrying thing for some Muslim parents. We are affected. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that he has affected Muslim communities as well.
So is that a very real concern then? Have other Muslim parents said to you, we're really worried that one day our children might up and leave and go to Syria?
No, I'm not saying they approach me. I'm saying it's just a common sense to make people aware of it, to be more concerned about the children, what they do. I mean, through internet these days, I mean, you don't know what they're watching. So we just always advise, even with drugs, not only in this matter, even with drugs and other things as well. So we just make communities aware of it.
The problem, I guess, Amin, is that these terrorists, these evil murderers, which is what they are. I mean, those bombers, the bombers who killed those innocent people in Brussels yesterday, they are murderers. They're child murderers. They're just despicable. But the problem is, they use your book and your faith to justify their actions. They say that they are following the Quran to its truest sense.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not too religious, but just the basic, I know a little bit words I've read in the Quran. The Quran says that if you kill one mankind, you are killing the whole of mankind. So the other thing is...
Yes, but the problem is, it says, I understand in the Quran, that it is okay to kill when you're on the battlefield, and they consider the streets of capital cities in the West to be the battlefield.
No, I disagree with that. I mean, when you say people, they say they think they'll go to paradise, who can guarantee they will go to paradise?
Well, I hope they don't. I hope there's a hell, and I hope they burn there forevermore.
Exactly. I mean, if they murder somebody, they should be murdered themselves. I mean, this is what I have strong feeling. I mean, got back in Pakistan, I'm giving example. In Pakistan, I've switched on the TV, the Asian channels, and every few weeks I've said there's a terrorist bombing in Pakistan. So what I'm trying to say this to our community, that we face these things in our country as well. They're Muslims, obviously killing Muslims. So when Trump says we are not doing enough, we become victims within our own country and own communities.
Amin, stay there. Let me bring Alison in Milton Keynes in. Hello, Alison.
Oh, hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Alison. What do you make of what Amin is saying? He's saying he, as a Muslim, he obviously does not in any way condone the behaviour of the terrorists. He despises their actions as much as you or I would as non-Muslims. And he and other Muslims that he knows are doing their bit to try and identify concerning things, and if necessary, they would report those concerning things. What more can Muslims do? I
don't think that's exactly true. I have worked in security for 10 years. I did my training 10 years ago at Heathrow Airport, and I met a really nice Muslim lady who also did her training. And we got on really well. We went to McDonald's, we had some lunch together and got chatting, and she said, oh, if I'm in Milton Keynes, I said, well, if you're in Milton Keynes, you're welcome around my house for something to eat and drink any time. She said, I will do that. A very nice girl she was. She dressed in Western dress, but she had a few problems with her parents because her parents didn't like her dressing like that. But she was really nice and honest. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, when I'm in Bethnal Green, I'll pop round and come and have a cup of tea with you. And, oh, no, she said, I'm sorry, you can't do that. I said, oh, okay, I thought that's where you lived. No, she said, you can't do that. My parents won't let you in because you're non-Muslim. I said, oh, okay. But I thought you lived here a long time. She said, well, I do. My parents have lived here 30 years. They don't really speak English very well, and they would not accept you in the house at all.
Really?
That's the truth.
I mean, can you believe that?
That is the truth, but she was a lovely girl.
Okay, I mean, if it was my parents, I've invited English people. I'm in local politics. I work with English people as well. They're good, very good people. We have a good understanding. I mean, we treat them like our own family. I mean, I brought English people to my home, for a dinner. And I'm telling you, hand on my heart, and honestly, this is where I have no feeling for anybody, even in this country. If anybody, I mean, you pick up local newspapers, and somebody got shot in East London gang fight, I still feel the same because nobody have a right to take anybody's life for whatsoever reason. Right? So, I mean, there's murders in this country as well, whether it's drugs or whatever.
But what's about murders? I'm just saying that I would come round for a coffee.
But what's interesting is that I think what Alison has pointed out is that she feels, and maybe she's voicing with a personal experience, a level of concern that there is an attitude from some in the Muslim community in this country that they don't want to really mix. They don't want to really mix with anyone who is non-Muslim. And, of course, that then raises concerns, it raises suspicions as to why doesn't that person want to mix? Why doesn't that family want to mix? What is it about me as a non-Muslim that they would find so distasteful they couldn't even have me round to their house for a cup of tea? And when you start to think like that, you start to be suspicious and you start to have a lack of trust. Yeah. Do you understand that?
Yeah, I understand. Like she said, the girl, she's fine. I mean, she's lovely, but it's the parents. Obviously, the parents have different thoughts. I mean, not everybody have the same thoughts. I mean, that's just individual.
But I guess, I mean, just to put it back to you, Alison, there are some people in this country who are racist. There are some people whose mum and dads may be racist, and they may well have said, oh, you've got a black friend at school, well, I don't want him or her coming round to our house. So you get that kind of prejudice from every community.
Jonathan, can I just point out, 3 weeks ago, I was just driving in a bushy and stopped at the traffic lights, and somebody opened a window, and because I'm Asian, and they opened a window, and my window was open, and he shouted, he goes, go back to your country. Now, how do you think that's going to make me feel? I mean, the guy doesn't even know what I do for the community. If he knew what I do for community, he would be saying that.
Alison, final word before the news for you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I do a lot for the community as well. I protect the community, and she was a really, really lovely person. Unfortunately, they forced her into an arranged marriage, and I lost contact with her phone. I did actually go to her house at Bethnal Green.
Did her parents know?
I couldn't find her, but she texted me and said that she didn't want the arranged marriage and everything else, but I've actually lost contact with her, and I feel quite sad for it because she was actually a really, really nice person.
Alison, I would hope that your experience of that particular Muslim... I've been asking, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims they can do more to prevent terrorism? Presidential hopeful Donald Trump has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their own community. Speaking to Good Morning Britain on ITV, he described yesterday's Brussels attacks as outrageous and a disgrace. He also said that there was a massive problem in Britain. Well, the so-called Islamic State group said it carried out the attacks that killed 34 people and wounded more than 200. I mean, it was truly awful what happened yesterday, but And of course, the focus has now shifted to how we, as a nation in this country, how we protect ourselves against this kind of attack happening here. And I'm sure other European countries are having exactly the same kind of discussion. My question to you is, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims that they could do a bit more? If you want to pick up the phone and share your thoughts, 03459 455 555, and particularly if you are Muslim listening to my programme today, how do you react to Mr. Trump's comments? Do you admit that you could do more, or do you think, hang on a minute, what's it got to do with me? It's not my fault that some complete nutter nutcase has taken my religion to an extreme and is now killing innocent people. What can I do? Pick up the phone, come on and share your thoughts on 03459 455 555. I'll take more of your calls very shortly.
The JVS Show.
I've been asking for your response to Donald Trump's latest comments. The presidential hopeful has said that Muslims in Europe are protecting each other by not turning in radicalised members of their community. I'll read you exactly what he said. He said, they're protecting each other, but they're really doing very bad damage. They have to open up to society and report the bad ones. When they see trouble, they have to report it. They are absolutely not reporting it, and that's a big problem. Well, I'm asking you, do you think it's fair to tell Muslims that they can do more to prevent terrorism? 03459 455 555 is the telephone number for you. Raheel Mohammed is the director of Masala Organisation. Good morning to you, Raheel.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Have I pronounced that organisation correctly?
It's Maslaha, but that's
okay. Thank you for correcting me.
It's okay.
What's your view then on Donald Trump's comments today that the Muslim community, that frankly you guys are not doing your bit, you could do more? Is that fair?
Well, first I just want to say my thoughts go out to the innocent people who've lost their lives in Brussels. My response to Donald Trump's comments would be, is he doing enough to prevent right-wing extremists killing people in the US? There are more people killed since 2001 by right-wing extremists than by jihadi extremists. So that would be my response to that. I think the question really is do our governments understand the lives of Muslim communities? Are they doing enough to win over trust and deal with some of the social inequalities that they're facing? And I think the answer to that is no. Let me give you an example of what I mean. We launched a report yesterday which looks at the number of young Muslim men in the criminal justice system in the UK, which is rising really steeply. If Muslim communities make up about 4.4% in England and Wales, the number of young Muslim men in prison is around 13%, and the number of young Muslim men in the Young Offender Institutes is around 22%. So my question would be, what is the government doing to tackle that social issue? And it's failing on a number of different levels. When we have young Muslim men who are, for instance, shaving their beards because they will get a less severe sentence, when we know of young Muslim men praying together in prisons, being seen as a gang activity, as threatening, there's a complete lack of understanding between government institutions and the lives of Muslim communities.
But here's the counter to that. Why should the government have to try and understand Muslim families? Why should the government have to? This is not a Muslim country. The vast majority of people that live in this country are not Muslim, nor do they want to be Muslim. So why should the government? Isn't this a case of, OK, if you are a Muslim, that's fine. You can believe in whatever you want to believe in this country. You can have whatever religious background you want to have. But frankly, you conform to the society that is the norm in this country.
I think the kind of the examples I gave before are actually about basic human rights and being treated equally. So if Muslim prisoners are being given more punitive sentences than their white counterparts for the same crime...
Do you believe that?
Well, we're told by criminal justice professionals and by young Muslim men that that's exactly what's happening.
Why?
And because of that, the government has actually launched a review. There were two reviews, the Young Review, which looked at this, and David Lammy has just launched a review at the beginning of this year looking at exactly that problem. So there's a significant level of discrimination within a major government institution. And part of the reason why this is happening, we think, is because there is such since at least 2001, Muslim communities have been seen through a particular lens in the media, and the knock-on effect that has on Muslim communities' lives, how they're seen both publicly but also by neighbours, by other people in work, is becoming deeply problematic. And so we know that prison guards, for instance, will be affected by, for instance, Donald Trump's remarks. They will be affected by negative media stereotypes that they may read or hear or see on television. And there isn't an appropriate government response to that at the moment. Last year, the government launched a prevent duty. And the question that you asked is, why should we treat Muslims differently? One of the things that the prevent duty is promoting is British values. Okay, so on face value, we would all agree with that. One of the British values is respect for minorities. The other is freedom of speech. And I would argue that the prevent duty is not allowing that to happen. It's actually shutting down debate about issues affecting Muslim communities, and also things like foreign policy. We can't ignore the effect foreign policy has on how Muslim communities view themselves and how they view themselves within wider society.
Well, I mean, there are many of us who believe that Muslim communities should be looking at the actions of this government and of the actions of this country, not as, oh, here's Britain attacking the Muslim world. It's nothing to do with trying to attack Muslims or kill Muslims. And in fact, if you think about it, if you think logically back to Iraq, even if Iraq was one massive cock-up, and I think most of us would agree that there were massive mistakes made over Iraq, the fact is that an evil dictator who was killing his own Muslim people was toppled partly by this country. So actually, rather than being angry at this country, shouldn't there be a little bit of thanks?
Well, I think it's about... So I'll give you an example of what I mean. I was in Tunisia last year at a conference, and it just so happened that those horrific attacks in Paris happened. And it was a conference that was full of a number of people from Europe, but also young leading leaders from North Africa. And there was a minute's silence for those lives who were lost in Paris. But then afterwards, people very openly, and this was both European and these North African young people, were saying, but we have to remember the lives that are being lost every single day in Libya, in Syria. Just the other day, a Saudi-led coalition, which includes the US and the UK, killed 120 innocent people. Now, that doesn't get reported.
But look at Syria, for example. Bashar al-Assad, this country is against Bashar al-Assad. He is a man that has been responsible for killing many of his own Muslim people. This is not about the West trying to kill Muslims. This is about the West trying to topple dictators and trying to implement democracy.
I think the point is that the governments in the West don't understand both domestically what the lives of Muslim communities. They don't understand.
Absolutely, and there are many people who would say, do you know what, the West should have just left well alone. It's too complicated to start trying to go into countries like Iraq, Syria and Libya. It's too tribal. Leave the various dictators in place. Leave them to deal with people. I think you're absolutely right. There are lots of people that now are of the opinion. However, it still doesn't undermine the fact that the intentions of this country and the West, it was never to kill Muslim people, never to kill innocent Muslim people.
Sure, but I think that if you look at these terrorists, they are growing up in Europe. So what is it that the governments are doing domestically to understand the lives of these communities?
Well, why do you think it's down to... I mean, you're shifting the blame to the government. I mean, why do you blame the government? These people who are... My personal belief is that these people are growing up in Europe. They are so damn lucky to be growing up in Europe when they could be growing up in all kinds of other countries with all kinds of major problems, not the kind of problems we have in this country and in other European countries. They should be growing up so thankful that they live where they live, rather than so filled with hatred and so filled with this desire to fight back against Europe. I mean, how on earth has this gone so wrong?
Well, I think again it's to do with, if we look at actually what's happening on the ground. So when you have 400,000 Muslim men of working age who leave school without educational qualifications, when you have Muslim women, highly qualified Muslim women who leave school with qualifications, but there was a recent report that showed 58% are experience discrimination in the workforce and 65% are unemployed. There is a major failure. So although, yes, I think we're all happy to live in the UK because we have the benefits of freedom of speech. But then with that comes, it's not just about being able to not be in a war zone. It's about are Muslim communities being treated equally? And the answer, I would say, an example of the criminal justice example, I would say no.
So you believe that Muslims are being treated badly from the criminal justice perspective? You believe that Muslim children are not being educated properly in this country? You believe that Muslim people are being the subject of prejudice in the workplace? And all of this is creating a sense of hostility, which then in some people can lead to a desire to fight back against the society.
It's at an extreme level, yes. But the other problem is, it's even the people who aren't committing extremist acts. What the government should be doing and wants to do is to bring those communities along with it, to say, we want to be your partners. We want you to help us tackle this issue. And when you have all of these other social inequalities happening, when you have distrust, when you have a prevent duty, which has led to at least 2,000 children under the age of 15 being sent on de-radicalization programs, that's not the way to create trust. What you're doing is alienating and stigmatizing communities. And until the government is able to tackle some of those issues and not create blunt tools, I mean, these are such complicated issues and they require a complicated approach.
Before I let you go, and it's been very interesting speaking to you, Rahil, the two men that, for example, bombed the airport yesterday in Brussels, do you think they're going to paradise?
If you believe in paradise, I'd say no.
Okay. You don't believe in paradise?
No, I'm saying I don't see them as being Muslim men.
And do you think that message maybe needs to be shouted louder? From the only community that frankly can shout it with any authority?
I was at an event yesterday with other faith leaders, and the message that came out loudly from there was, this is a problem that people of all faith and none need to be dealing with. It's not just
Yes, sure, but I could say they're not Muslims, they're murderers, they're but it doesn't have as much authority because I'm not Muslim myself.
You know what? In this event yesterday, there was a woman who stood up and said, it said exactly what you're just saying right now. I want more Muslim people to come out and speak out strongly against this. And there was a young Muslim woman who sat beside her, and she stood up and said, I'm almost in tears that you're saying this, because we constantly are saying this is not in the name of Islam, this is not in the name of Muslim communities. And no matter how loud we say this, it doesn't get heard. I don't know what more I have to do for you to understand that. And that's how Muslim communities are feeling right now.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. Rahil Mohammed there. 03459 455 555. Do you think it's fair to tell Muslims that they can do more to prevent terrorism? Ben in Watford. Hello, Ben.
Hiya.
Hello. What are your thoughts, Ben?
Oh, well, I believe that I'm a lorry driver and I see all walks of life. I must first say that I am in no way, shape or form racist at all. I condemn racism. But what I feel that any other faith, any other colour or anything else, we just need a little bit more reassurance from the Muslim community, because in all fairness, it's all right every now and again hearing say, no, this isn't Islam, this isn't, we condemn this. Unfortunately, no, you don't hear it a lot. You really don't. You get on social media, everything's plastered around with that idiot group, Britain First, there is who are just as idiotic as did Donald Trump, because you just can't go around saying, oh, Muslims can do this, that and the other. But I think what the non-Muslim people need is just a little bit more reassurance, because we have social media and we have news filled with Islamophobia and all this, that and the other. I mean, me personally, I believe that Islam is a very outdated religion. I think Christianity, if you look at Christianity, I mean, we were barbaric with what we used to do back in years and years and years ago in the name of Christ. But as a form, we have the New Testament. I believe it was all sort of rewritten and whatnot because it was barbaric. In England, we have fought for years and years and years for the same rights as women, so we can all be treated equally. But, I mean, I'm not being funny. You look at even the peaceful Muslims and whatnot, the women are walking behind. The women are told that if they're showing their flesh, it's a wrong, it's a sin, And it's a little bit outdated myself, and I think I speak for quite a few people, but I just believe that if I mean there was, I can tell you I've only ever heard of one rally from Muslims saying that we're against the extremism.
But maybe you're blaming the wrong people. Maybe you're blaming the media. Really, because maybe Muslims are marching and campaigning, and maybe the media is just not reporting it.
This is very true. This is very true. I can't say against that. But in all fairness, why isn't, let's say, the Muslim Express saying this is all a load of twaddle? This is all rubbish. We're not extremisms. I mean, you can't tar everybody with the same brush. I mean, I stop in a Costa Coffee every day, and 90% of the people that make my lovely coffee are very friendly Muslims, and I've got nothing against them. But
but what do you want? Do you want them, as they hand over your mocha frappa latte, to say, "Oh, by the way, I don't like ISIS"?
No, but I would like to see a lot more people shouting. When on the news, it is down to media. You're right. It's social media or newspapers or television. You can't tar everyone with the same brush. But at the same time, all we're hearing is the bad stuff. And
okay. Ben, thank you so much for your call. Very interesting. Irfan in High Wycombe. Hello to you, Irfan.
Hi.
Hi. What are your thoughts on this?
First, I'd like to address the quote you made that said in the Quran that it is okay to kill a non-Muslim person, but only in the state of battlefield. The Quran is a very, very tricky book to read, and it can only really be read in the proper Arabic. It loses a lot in translation.
Well, that's part of the problem in itself, isn't it? That we have, I understand, two different versions of the Quran in the UK at the moment that have been translated into English. And I understand, that one of the versions of the Quran that's been translated into English that is the most widely available because it has the most money behind it is the version that's come from Saudi Arabia, which some people argue portrays it in a slightly more hard-line way than the other version.
Absolutely. The problem with Saudi Arabia is, although it's you have two main sects of Islam, you have Sunni and you have Shia. Now, within those, you have subsects, if you like. Saudi Arabia prophetically practices the Wahhabi version, which is very extreme. Okay, I mean, that's the one that women can't drive, women should be covered. It's not the widely practiced Sunni sect.
And is that the version of the Quran that is being translated into English?
More than likely, if it's backed by Saudis.
Well, that's the information I've been given. Anyway, what's your view then on the Muslim community in this country and in Europe, and whether you could do more to prevent terrorism?
In all honesty, what can we do? What can we do? I mean, literally, we do everything that can be expected of a reasonable person. We still got day jobs to go to. We still got families to look after. When we do come across stuff like this, do you think, extremists actually broadcast, go around dropping leaflets in our letterbox? Hi there, this is my name, this is my views, this is what we're going to do. We don't hear about it. We have no idea what's going on. When we do get wind of, maybe something's wrong, something's in the pipeline, do you think we're not fair for the safety of our families, our children, that they could be targeted by these idiots as well? Because moderate Muslims are seen as infidels by the people, the likes of ISIS. We're not considered Muslims. All right? We're considered just as fair game as non-Muslims are. So we fear for our lives as well. We fear for the lives of our families, for the lives of our community. I live in High Wycombe. Now, High Wycombe has had several terror-related arrests in the past few years. However, majority of the time, they come to nothing. Now, I agree with the current climate, it's better to be safe than sorry, better to raid a property and find nothing than, an event like what's happened in Brussels, what happened on 7/7, something like that to take place. I'd much rather be safe than sorry. However, people get tarred with that brush. I mean, Wycombe, even though there may be been one or two people prosecuted, we've had quite, if you want to say famous, I don't think that's the right word for it, a chap who went to Syria who's part of ISIS, used to work in the local Morrisons. That's what Wycombe gets highlighted for. Oh, these people are from Wycombe, that must represent Wycombe. No, it does not represent Wycombe.
But surely the Muslim community, and you need to be kind of spreading this message to the other Muslims that you know in your community. You need to be sending that message that, look, I know it's frustrating, but this is all in the country's good in the end. And we have to just put up with the fact that there is going to be more targeting of Muslim households at the moment in an effort to try and find anyone that is up to no good.
You know what? Every Friday, the Imam preaches this. He goes, look, it is better to be safe than sorry. Yeah. He goes, we are Muslims. This is a non-Muslim land. All right? What they say in the Quran, it says when you live in a non-Muslim land, you follow the laws of the non-Muslim land. Okay? Only when it becomes difficult for you to practice your own religion, then it no longer becomes viable for you to live in that non-Muslim land. It doesn't say go and attack them. It says, you know what, when you can't practice your faith in a non-Muslim land, if you're being forbidden, if you're being stopped, then it's time to move on. Okay, it doesn't say go and attack people.
Let's hope that your Imam is typical of all Imams in this country. Thank you very much, Irfan, for your call.
Thank you.
Really interesting.